Hello everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Highlander, the show where we talk about every single legendary card in Hearthstone. I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Jamie. How are you doing, Jamie?
Hi everybody, I'm good, thank you.
I'm James, telling you to sit back and relax as we talk about more cards. So we're going to do something a little bit different this episode. We're recording 4 days before Scholomance Academy comes out, and we thought it'd be really fun to look through some of the legendaries we're most excited to. We've decided to pick 3 each.
Yeah.
Which was really hard because we're quite excited about quite a lot of the cards in this set, but we've managed to whittle it down to 3. Let's crack on talking about them then. Our first card is Lorekeeper Polkelt. This is a 4-mana, 4/5 legendary neutral. Battlecry, reorder your deck from the highest cost card to lowest cost card. This card seems completely insane to me, and I think it does to you, but I kind of want to get your theorycraft brain on it. Like, what's the stupidest thing that you can think of doing with this card?
So this was my first pick. There's so much you can do with this effect that it's hard to even sort of work through all the combinations. The obvious thing is Quest Warlock in Standard,
okay,
which is already a decent tier 2 deck going into Scholomance. And the usual win condition for that is using the Quest Hero power to discount, burn, or Malagos to 0, and then burning the opponent out with a combination of that and Alexstrasza. It's often discounted as well. I think it's pretty obvious that Polkelt helps with this, because you can Polkelt and then play the hero power, and then you'll get a Malagos or an Alexstrasza, guaranteed to be 0 cost.
Oh, I see. I suppose this deck is going to be surprisingly consistent, because this runs Plot Twist as well, doesn't it? So if you draw your expensive dragons, you can always Plot Twist, hope that you draw Polkelt, and then hero power, and you'll just automatically get one of them discounted to 0. That seems like a really good application. Yeah. That's really cool.
And I think the thing to bear in mind is that this is already a tier 2 deck without the extra consistency of Polkelt, right? Like, the deck's good already. It works.
Yeah.
Even when it's just completely random tapping with no real sort of tutor effect.
I think it's insane how it's not even particularly slow either, because sometimes an effect like this, or as powerful as this, is on an expensive body. For example, I think everyone would agree that Geppetto Joybuzz's effect is completely crazy, but he is an 8-mana card.
Yeah.
And it's a 6/6 at that, so it's quite poor tempo. Whereas this, I'm not suggesting that you play it on curve, because obviously you don't really want to do that in most scenarios, but it doesn't feel that slow. You can play other things alongside it, like, I don't know, like just some remove, like an unstable Fellbolt or something like that, you know?
Yeah, it's a very flexible card for such a powerful effect. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to print a card like this in the first place, but
yeah,
I would have thought you would be looking at 7 or 8 mana for it. 7 maybe would seem about right. It's Yeti stats. It's not sort of incredible, but it's certainly good enough on a 4-drop.
That always helps minions like this, when it's just the fact that you can play them so cheaply. As I say, like, you could play, I don't know, a Hellfire alongside or something like that to make, so you don't have to choose between clearing the board and playing this card. It's just, it's just utterly crazy. I suppose it shows how powerful the game is now, that these sort of effects can be printed on vanilla bodies, but
yeah.
Anyway, speaking of problematic, the application that I can think of that it's absolutely going to be used in, and I would be shocked if it doesn't get used in this, and I've spoke to you about this before, is in Wild Secret Mage.
Yeah.
That deck lives or dies by drawing a Lunaf, which is the 6-mana weapon from Kobolds and Catacombs for Mage. 0 free weapon that at the end of your turn, draw 3 cards. Now, the card is so good that it's usually kept in the mulligan, because the deck needs it as its only source of draw. Because your curve tops out with a Lunaf, I think this card is absolutely going to see play in that deck. I would be shocked if it doesn't. There's already a card you can cut for it, which is Stargazer Luna. I just don't see a world where it doesn't see play in that deck, and I think it's going to really, really bump the power level of an already good, like, tier 2 or 3 deck up a little bit as well.
Polkelt chooses your 3 best cards, which are Cabal Crystal Runner, which is a 0-mana 5/5. We've seen how good 0-mana 5/5s are. Corridor Creeper, we're looking at you. And then it'll eventually draw you Alaneth, which in turn will draw you into Cloud Prince or the Crystal Runners. It streamlines the late game of the deck far better than any sort of other card could, really.
Yeah, you run plenty of 1 mana and 2 mana minions in Cabal Lackey and Arcane Flak Mage, but you don't really want to be drawing those in the late game. You want to be drawing your Fireballs and, like you say, the Crystal Runners, Cloud Princes. By reordering your deck in this way, it just lets you draw them immediately. What other decks do you think it could work in?
So, Razor Priest runs Dragon Queen Alexstrasza as its highest cost card, but Dragon Queen Alexstrasza isn't particularly good after the nerf in that deck, so it'll just get cut, which leaves your curve as Anduin and Geppetto on 8, and then Scream Reno, and then it goes down from there.
Yeah.
Tutor and Anduin's insane. Like, insane, right? You can't even rat it. It's an interesting thing you can do is that if you're playing Reno Warlock, you always play Gnome Ferrata pretty much always. So let's say you're playing against a Razor Priest and they play Polkelt, you can just Gnome Ferrata the Anduin because you know it's there.
That is a really good point, actually. Oh, do you know what else you could do? You could play the card that swaps the top cards of your decks.
There's loads of weird corner cases, but like given that Gnome Ferrata is a card that sees play in the deck anyway, it's going to make that matchup really weird if Polkelt does become standard because the Warlock's going to kind of have to hold like brand Gnome Ferrata Zola and Gnome Ferrata for when they play Polkelt. But then the priest can just Illucia it and steal it.
Well, let's get on to that a bit later. Eh?
Yeah, well, that's a point for another time. Another one is Even Warlock.
Even Warlock, I'm a little bit uneasy about saying, just because of the fact that...
I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's worth trying. That would be my thought process on it, right?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I think it's going to come down to how threatening is an 8-8 every turn, do you know? And the answer is probably very. The reason I'm just a little more dubious on that is just because of the fact that you sometimes want to draw your cheaper cost cards as well, but I don't know. It's still very scary.
It doesn't come down until turn 4, and you've got a fairly high hand size by then anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I don't think it's a card you just sort of play whenever you need to play it.
Yeah.
It's obviously kind of situational.
Yeah.
Probably won't make the cut in the end, but I definitely think it's worth trying.
Oh, certainly.
So for standard decks, any Highlander deck probably.
Yeah. Any
control deck in standard.
Yeah.
You probably don't play it in the aggro matchup, but against control, then it's like super powerful because it's a super powerful anti-control card. That's obvious to say, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be one of those where if it becomes popular, the Highlander mirror is just going to be decided by who draws Polkelt first, because then they'll have access to all their late game and the opponent's going to be stuck drawing random stuff.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's a little bit like who draws Luna's Pocket Galaxy first.
I think it's quite similar, actually. I think it could be pretty unpleasant if Highlander decks become really popular.
Yeah, which they are.
Yeah, that's it, right? I may be overstating it a bit, but I think it could end up being a bit coin flippy, right?
Yeah.
Some sort of Demon Hunter variant might run it, because then you shoot a skull. If you're in a low curve deck, you shoot a skull, and that's like pretty good. Shooting the best card in your deck. And then your skull draws your other skull.
That's a really good point.
It gets to that point, right, where it's just...
It's not even bad to play on Kerp. Again, it's just a 4-mana 4/5. Like, it's just good. It's just good.
Yeah. Quite a lot of Demon Hunters don't play Priestess of Fury anyway, and this is just an excuse to cut it, because it's kind of a dodgy card in the deck, so... God, Polkelt is stupid.
Shall we move on to another card?
Let's move on to another card.
Sphere of Sapience. 1 mana, 0/4, neutral weapon. At the start of your turn, look at your top card. You can put it on the bottom and lose 1 durability. So this is one of my picks, and I don't even know where to begin with this card. Let's just get the obvious thing out of the way. I don't think this is going to break Twig of the World Tree. You know, I think the ability to aid in your top decks, especially for Highlander decks, where sometimes the draw is much more limited, is absolutely crazy. In these decks where consistency is lacking, shall we say, because of the Highlander condition, this card just helps in that in so many different ways.
Anything remotely slow, anything Highlander, most combo decks I think will play it as well.
I just think of every time that I've ever had a lucky top deck in a Highlander deck, every time that I've top decked Reno because I'm such an amazing Hearthstone player, well, now I have the ability to sort of manipulate that because I can actually reorder the cards in my deck a little bit. I get 4 opportunities to do it. It just increases the chances of top decking the card by that much. I feel like this has to go in those decks, surely. I lose my mind when I think about this card because I think, right, if Razor Priest is a way to increase its odds of top decking Raza or Anduin, or Psychic Scream or Reno Jackson or any of these cards, like that can't be good. That can't be good. There's that application of it. I also think it just goes into the majority of slow control decks in Wild, and probably Standard as well, right? Just because a lot of them don't run weapons like Reno Shaman or Reno Mage and stuff like that. They just aids their top decks and aids their consistency to such a degree.
Having the ability to just look at the top card of your deck before you draw it, that's insane, really. It's obviously not an aggro card because you don't want to go one card down in an aggro deck. It's a net minus card if you look at card value, right?
And in an aggro deck, your curve is so low that you can play the majority of what you top deck anyway, right? The card advantage point is an interesting one because I've had a few people say a similar thing to me when they're saying it won't be played because, like you say, it makes you down in card advantage. But what I would say is, if you're holding an unplayable card in your hand because it either doesn't do anything in the matchup or it's too expensive for you to play right then that is negative card advantage. Like, it's just a dead card in your hand, which you don't want. If you can play this card and use it to reduce the odds of having dead cards in your hand, that has to be an advantage. That has to be like a positive, right?
The card advantage point is fair. It's just because, I think it's a good counterpoint to some of the people who are saying, oh, it's going to be in every deck, blah, 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 which is, it's obviously rubbish.
Yeah, like you say, I don't think this card is going to be game-breaking in any sense. I just think it's going to be a nice card that most control decks will want to run straight off the bat.
Because some decks in some matchups don't care about card advantage because they're always going to have card advantage. Like if any sort of remotely slow deck against an hyper aggro or aggro deck, they're always going to be playing the control, which means that they're always going to be ahead on cards, which means that Sphere is always going to be useful.
Aside from Browser Priest, the other thing that I was thinking of was Reno Warlock.
This card seems pretty helpful in Warlock because you're pretty much got card advantage in your hero power.
I mean, it's not even like you have to use it every turn. It's the fact that you get the opportunity to get the absolute worst cards to top deck. You put them at the bottom of the deck. Like, that seems insane to me. We'll have to see how powerful it is, but I would be willing to bet that it's incredibly powerful in like slow decks. This is one of your picks. Instructor Fireheart. This is a Shaman legendary, 3 mana 3/3 minion, battle cry. Discover a spell that costs 1 or more. If you play it this turn, repeat this effect. Now, when I first saw this card, I thought, oh no, is this a mage card? And then I just freaked out because I thought, what on earth is this? Now I'm a little more restrained. It's very interesting, this card. I know you picked this for a reason because I think it's really cool, but what do you think about it?
This is one of my favourite cards in the set. It's well up there. It's a really neat card because a 3 mana 3/3 that with battle cry discover a spell, if you need to play it on curve, that's just good. 3 mana 3/3 sort of draw a card. Would that see play? Yes, it would. So it kind of, there's no real downside to it. But what I particularly like about it is the combo potential with some of the other cards that are knocking about in Shaman. This is mainly standard, but there may be something you can do with it in Wild. The way sort of spell-based Shaman is going, there's a lot of discover effects, which means that there's a card from Saviors of All Doom called Dwarven Archaeologist. There's a 2 mana 2/3 neutral epic. After you discover a card, reduce its cost by 1. This is a fine card to just play because it's 2 mana 2/3. Like I said, Shaman's got a lot of discover effects, like the new discover a spell damage minion. It's obviously just good with that. It's good with Marshborn, 3 mana 3/4. Battlecry, if you played a spell previous turn, discover a spell. It's good with that. You can kind of tailor the deck to be more discover based.
See, when I first saw it, I thought, hang on, Shaman doesn't have anything like Sorcerer's Apprentice or Radiant Elemental or any way to discount the spells. I thought, how on earth are they actually going to make use of this card? But then that's a really good point. That's really interesting that you say that. I wonder what people will do with that.
So Fireheart reads that you discover a spell that costs 1 or more, which means that if you get a 1-cost spell, Archaeologist will discount it to 0, and then you can go again for free. I mean, I think it's going to be played purely because Dwarven Archaeologist is a good tempo card that's a high priority target for the opponent to kill on curve, because it's a 2 mana 2/3 with a threatening aura effect. Like I said, Shaman's got a hell of a lot of discover effects. People are going to panic when they see it, so it's just a fine card in the deck anyway.
Good choice for like unique cards of the set, because there aren't really very many that are like this. I think of like Lyra the Sun Shard, and that's the only one I can think of. I mean, I know that card's got an aura, but the thing is, it's like, how many times does Lyra actually stick And the answer is it never has. Lyra has never been on the board for more than one turn, so it's just...
Well, if it does, you lose the game. I think the fact that Priest got dragged out of like tier 5 by that one card, and that made a tier 2 deck in Ungoro, it's kind of indicates of the power of the card, really. Anyway, it's more flexible than Lyra. It's more versatile. You've got a lot more mana to work with.
God, because you actually get to choose the spell as well.
That's what I was saying. The card's good.
I know you're talking mostly about standard here, but I'm trying to think, would I run this in my Reno Shaman? And I'm thinking, do you know, I maybe would.
I would. Absolutely. No. What do you mean? Of course you would. It's just very good in Reno Shaman. It's just like
it's just the hand size issue with Shudder Walk, but I don't know.
But you can still just discover an answer in a matchup that you need an answer in. It's versatile enough of a card that I think you may as well, right?
Should we move on to another card?
Yeah.
This is one of my cards. This is a 3 mana, 3/2 warrior and paladin legendary minion. It's Lord Barov. Battle Cry. Set the health of all of the minions to 1. Death Rattle. Deal 1 damage to all minions. This was one of the later cards revealed. It was just before the card dump. In the Dead Man's Hand Discord, we were all saying, oh no, we've had no cards revealed. And I said to everyone, right, Bladestorm came out really late last expansion, and that card turned out to be really, really good. So just keep your hopes up. And then this card got revealed like within a few hours of me saying that. And I was like, see, I bloody well told you. I think this card is absolutely mental. I think it's completely insane. I don't think it's game-breaking like some other people seem to think it is, but I think it's completely mad. It's certainly going in my lists as soon as I get it. I'm going to test it out. But just to get a paladin's perspective on it, what do you make of Lord Barov?
Like you say, I don't think it's super game-breaking. It's not one of those where it's like, oh my god, this is just broken, it just wins you the game. It's just a very good effect. Very efficient for its cost. Versatile. It's like just nice. The weird thing about the card is that I kind of wish it wasn't 3. For Wild, it probably will go in like the hybrid Libra and Paladin, but that doesn't really need it. Like it'll play it because it's quite efficient, but as a deck that doesn't play Consecration, right? It just plays Wild Pyro and the 2 Libra of Justice, and that's kind of fine. So it's kind of going to be a tough call whether you actually run it, and I think you probably will. But the fact that it's two-sided is a bit iffy. The thing I would say is that the deck that really needs this effect is even Paladin. But then you can't make this card as good or, like, over the top, like, to change its cost either way. Because at 4 mana, it would be just a bit iffy. And at 2 mana, it would be stupid. You can't really win. Which is why we need a quality backup too, because even Paladin kind of needs that to actually function as the weird sort of beat down hybrid deck that it is.
Do you know, I think this is the 3rd podcast in a row where we've begged Blizzard to put a quality back to 2.
Yeah, because it needs to happen. It needs to happen. Because the thing is that the quality at 4 is no one plays it, which is an indicator that the card shouldn't be 4 cost for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason that they didn't put it at 3 was because of worries about Odd Paladin, right? I've seen some people say that this could actually work in Odd Paladin, and obviously the reason...
No, I disagree. Actually, I think it's pretty anti-synergistic with the deck. It's like a decent...
Well, so do I.
It's a decent way of punching through Spreading Plague, and that's about all the use of it, if you ask me.
I know from playing against that deck a lot that the way that you win is Whirlwind effects, and this is Odd Paladin playing a bloody Whirlwind effect. Like, I don't see a universe where they play this card.
It's good in one matchup, and it's not even particularly good in that matchup. You'd rather just buff their stats with Quartermaster. What makes Odd Paladin so annoying to deal with is the fact that it's very good at giving its minions Divine Shield, and getting rid of all your Divine Shields is just completely stupid, really. Unless you're playing, Bolvar Fireblood. More power to you if you're doing that, but frankly, I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt it. If Odd Paladin's playing this, something's really going wrong for that deck.
Something's really going wrong, or the deck has fundamentally changed, and I don't really see either of those happening. I feel like the people that are saying this are maybe ignoring the fact that the vast majority of the time it's just going to be sat there as a dead card in your hand that you don't want to play because it's detrimental to your own board. Whereas, it's, like you say, it's useful against Spreading Plague and maybe Q-Block, and that's about it.
You have to sort of think when you're evaluating cards in decks when the deck's actually going to want to play this. If Odd Paladin's playing this, it's already lost because it's having to trade and it doesn't want to have to trade. think Master Overspark's better than this, and that dot doesn't see play in the deck, so...
I mean, IMB Cowl, that's another one.
Oh, don't mention that card.
Neutral Silence. Oh, sorry about that, Jimmy.
IMB Owl's a shocking card. I don't know why anybody plays it in any deck.
But it is better than this.
Odd Warrior is about the only deck that I can back IMB Owl in, because that deck is so bad that it actually needs a silence effect to not lose horrendously to any slow deck.
So... let's talk about Odd Warrior. Let's talk about Odd Warrior, because I've seen some people say about this being run in Odd Warrior. I don't think it makes a cut. Although it is a Control Warrior deck, it doesn't actually run that many Whirlwind effects. You know, not many of them run Ravaging Ghoul. It's kind of clunky with Dynamatic if you're running that. You know, you don't run Whirlwind in that deck, you don't run Risky Skippers, and all the other good Whirlwind effects are all costing like 2 or 4 or whatever. I feel like the deck can do better than that.
That's what I was going to say. It gives the deck another AoE, which it doesn't need.
It's not the problem with the deck. The problem with the deck is it can't beat value.
Yeah, well, that's the thing you have to evaluate, is that sure, it'll clear a cube blocks like front-loaded board, but then it'll still be another one for them to deal with. And eventually they're always going to run out. If it gives them another board clear, that's all very well, but in the long run, it doesn't really matter.
I feel like the deck where this really shines is Dead Man's Hand Warrior. As I've said, this card looks absolutely insane in that deck. A somewhat recent innovation in the deck has been running Risky Skippers. Like all Warrior decks probably should at this point.
I've been played a bit of the deck. I think Risky Skipper is probably the best card in the deck, given that people are playing Captain's Parrot due to it. This is 2020 and we're playing Captain's Parrot in a deck. It's got to be a pretty good card for that to make the cut. Risky Skipper's a pretty good card.
Don't use we. I do not buy to running Captain's Parrot in Dead Man's Hand. But anyway, this deck runs an abundance of Whirlwind effects. So you run Scourge Lord Garrosh a lot of the time. Sometimes run Warpath. You sometimes run Blade Storm. You always run Skippers. Sometimes you run Blood Razor. And every single one of these cards is incredible with Barov. And it's funny because one of the deck's power plays when I was playing like a slower version for quite a long time was Blood Razor on 4 and then Plague of Wrath on 5. And this is like a really good board clear. And this was really good during Darkest Hour Warlock being really popular. It's good into Q-Block. It's good into like any number of aggro decks. It's great into even Shaman. And now I think, right, now I can go Barov on 3 and then Blood Razor on 4. Or I can go Blood Razor on 4, Barov on 3. Like, it's just, that in itself is like a number of possibilities. And then I also think, right, I can do it with the Death Knight. I can go Barov and Death Knight Hero Power to clear an entire board. And I still have a body on board. And like previously, we were talking about Plague of Wrath with the Death Knight being an amazing power play, which is like a 7-mana Twisting Nether. But now you've got a 5-mana one that you can keep cycling, and it just seems completely crazy. As I say, I don't think it's going to break the game, but I do think this is a really, really good card in a deck that is already synergized heavily with it. Unlike something like Odd Warrior, where it doesn't really patch up a lot of the problems with the deck, one of the problems with DMH, especially for the skipper builds, is dealing with tall early boards, so like Big Shaman, whereas this card is really, really good against decks like that. James
is the expert on DMH here, but I've played quite a lot of it last month, the N'Zoth build specifically. The main thing I think that this particularly helps with is with Garrosh. Garrosh Plague of Wrath is your late game anti-board like development sort of combo. And this is just objectively better than Plague of Wrath in that circumstance, because it leaves a body behind.
And it's 2 mana less.
And it's the 2 mana less, yeah, exactly. So it's just an all-around improvement to that cycle.
The one problem that I will say with the card is the fact that you have to sort of sequence it properly with Skipper. The fact that it sets all of your minions to 1 is a bit of a downside. But that is the only problem that I can really see with the card in that deck. I think it just goes straight in. So I'm excited to test it.
That's the problem I have with the card in Paladin, actually. And that's the real breaker, because Leaving Paladin's all about big minions in the mid-game and pressuring people out. And it's kind of anti-synergistic a little bit. I would say there's 28 cards that are very good in the deck and 2 tech cards. And we've got a hell of a lot more than 2 cards coming in that are all, I think, better than Barov. Abbas, Devout Pupil, maybe Braggart. I think those are all quite a bit better. Maybe not Braggart, but Devout Pupil's insane and Abbas is insane. I'll test it. It'll probably require a bit of figuring out, but...
So you're obviously talking about Labouring Paladin in Wild, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about it being used in Standard? Because you've obviously played quite a bit of it in Standard really recently.
Barov.
Yeah.
It's not really very synergistic with the deck again. It's less synergistic or anything because Pure Paladin in Standard is quite aggressive. Tempo is what it is. It's very, very tempo-y deck. It runs things like, it runs Shotbot, for example. It's all about like pressure. The thing with Pure Paladin is that you can generally make big bots faster than pretty much any other deck in the format. And like tall minions and stuff. Pure Paladin goes pretty much as tall as any deck in the format. I don't think Barov really helps. I could be wrong. The deck might change a bit, but I suspect I'm not.
Shall we move on to another card?
Yeah, can do.
Jandice Barov. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Hey, it's another Barov. Right, so this is a 5-mana, 2/1 mage and rogue legendary minion. Battle Cry. Summon 2 random 5-cost minions. Secretly pick one that dies when it takes damage. So this is one of your picks. So what are your first thoughts about putting this card in the deck then? What do you think?
I think you put in a lot of decks, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's really, really strong. The thing you have to think about with this card is that it looks kind of iffy. You know, random 5 drops, give one essentially 1 health, blah, 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 blah. But it's like a build a board in 1 card, and there's not really anything else that does that, like especially at 5. Because let's say like you roll sort of reasonably low and get like a 4/4 and like a 3/3. Again, you turn the 3/3 into a 3/1 because of the ping. That's still a lot of stats. You know, it's still like a 9/6 for 5 spread across 3 that doesn't die to like a small AoE, and it doesn't die to single target removal. So it's like inefficient for your opponent to remove, and that's like not a particularly good roll. So it strikes me as being a card that people kind of are misevaluating a bit. Most mage decks and rogue decks in Standard will run it. Odd Rogue in Wild will certainly try it. Whether it'll make the cut, I don't know, but it's in the running.
Do you know when you sort of try and evaluate how much stats this is actually putting on the board, the one thing that I think a lot of people are glossing over is the fact that you don't know which of the minions you've picked as the one that dies. Yes, in the ideal situation, you're just trading a 1/1 into a minion and you figure out, okay, it's that one. But at the same time, it's like, you have to be in that position, or if you're a mage, you have to like ping it, and you could be wrong, in which case you've really screwed yourself over. If you're a rogue trading with the weapon, it turns out to be the wrong one, it could be really bad. And even if it turns out to be the right one, you've just taken a bunch of damage or you've wasted some mana and you've still got like a random 5 drop there. So the stats left over are still quite good. I think this card is really, really good. I feel like people are underestimating it. I don't know if it's quite good enough for Wild, partly because it's also easier for people to test the effects in Wild. Like, for example, Warlock has Defile. Lots of classes have like Whirlwind effects or AoE or like Priestess Mass Hysteria and stuff like that. Or, you know, the AoE is more prevalent. Dex boards are tougher or are stickier, so they've got more liberty to test the cards. And it also may just be too slow. But I think certainly for Standard, like, the fact that this card sort of messes with your opponent's head is interesting.
What I like about the card so much is that I think if you look across both formats, it's quite possibly the highest tempo 5 drop out of anything in the game. In terms of stats, I don't think anything gets sort of near to it. The closest thing is like an 8/8. To make it equal to Hydra, you'd have to roll like a 5/5 and like a 1/2. And like I said, I think it's very annoying to deal with.
Yeah.
It's a sort of reasonably sized board in 1 card. It's asymmetrical, so you can't AoE it efficiently. The other thing I was going to say is that the best comparison to this is former champ. This batters former champ, right?
Yes, it does.
Most odd road decks in Standard used to run former champ.
Just trying to remember what this is. This is the 5-mana 1/1 that summons a 5/5, right?
And obviously, you can just high roll as well. You can get like a powerful Death Rattle or like a Divine Shield minion or like a Rush minion.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's just, quite a nice curve top for aggro as well. It's very good at capitalising on an advantage if you're already ahead.
Should we move on to the final card? 2 mana, 1/3, priest, legendary minion. This is Mindrender Illucia. The battle cry, swap hands and decks with your opponent until your next turn. So this is my final pick. I think the best way to describe this card is Dirty Rat, Azalina Soul Thief, and maybe King Togwaggle all rolled up into one card that costs 2 mana. I think this card is completely insane. I don't think it's as game-breaking as a lot of people have been saying, but I do think it's really, really good and may single-handedly propel Reno Priest to the best deck in the Wild format. In Wild, combo decks are really, really prevalent. The thing about some of these combo decks is that they have quite cheap combo pieces. So, for example, Mechathune Warlock uses Cataclysm, which is a 4-mana spell. It uses Dullmaster Dorian, which is a 5-mana minion. You can usually get a pretty good read if your opponent has a combo piece in their hand, because they're usually just sat there, since Mechathune Warlock runs almost nothing but Cycle and AoE and combo pieces. You can pretty clearly predict whether you should Mind Render and then just do that. And that wins you an almost unwinnable matchup, because if you take out any of their combo pieces, you've just won. They've got no way to come back from that.
My initial reaction to this card was it's one of the best cards that's in the game that they've ever printed, and I think I stand by that. The thing with this card is that Razor Priest is kind of one of the top sort of few decks in Wild. It's because of its exceptional matchup into aggro and traditional control. The only thing that keeps it in check is faster combo decks than it. So what Mindrender Illucia being printed does is it patches up the deck's main weakness. So Quest Mage is regarded as a fairly skill testing deck. I think that's true to an extent, but the thing with a lot of people that I play against online who are playing Quest Mage are terrible pilots, but they get away with it because the deck's easy to play up to a point and you can still win with it, even if you don't play super well. But now, with Illucia against Priest, the Quest Mage can't get away with it, because if they just try and turbo the quest out, they'll just get their quest taken and then they'll lose. This has applications against every combo deck, because even if you can't actively get rid of their combo pieces, you can still just slow them down or make it really awkward for them. So I think against with a Malygos is that generally it's going to be hard for you to actually get rid of their combo because their minions are all too high cost and they're reliant on Aviana to discount them. You can just use a bunch of their draw and cycle or chuck away all their burn.
If you're chucking away their cycle, that deck has a massive issue with hand size. So you can just force them to overdraw as well, because you're still drawing from their deck. So if they've got a juicy Psych Melon in hand, you can just play that and possibly overdraw.
Or you can just play an Overflow and overdraw them 4 cards or something if it's a deck that's playing Overflow.
Yeah. Another thing about the Aviana Kun versus Priest thing is to solve these hand size issues, you sometimes have to tempo out, innovate, or something like that. The problem with doing that is if your opponent is playing Illucia, they can actually get rid of your second innovate or some of the burn spells and make it so you really, really have to think about what cards you're going to tempo out, because the opponent could always Illucia, get rid of the actual extra copies that you've then drawn, and then just make you lose on the spot.
At which point, with Razor Priest's extra speed that it's gotten from some of the new cards in this set, it can kind of counterplay it and get it to a point where you'll just die.
And it's one card.
The thing to note is that this all sounds like, it's just a 10 against certain matchups, but this is a one-card answer to all the things that were keeping this deck in check, because it kind of runs over most aggro and mid-rangey tempo decks, and big Shaman and stuff like that. You can usually beat that fairly comfortably. It's just it's a sort of super powerful tech card. And the other thing to say in particular detail, and this goes for both formats, is that it's an exceptional stall card against hyper aggro or aggro in general.
If they're for example, Penance or Shadow Word Pain, do you care? No, you just carry on. It's just a waste of the turn.
It's like a Doomsayer, right? That's also got utility in the late game as well, which Doomsayer doesn't really. Oh yeah, and it gives you information so you know what removal to save for what, how things are going to line up.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to really, really upset a lot of standard players because of the fact that Galakron Priest is so popular.
And most decks, Highlander decks, won't appreciate you. Highlander Hunter won't appreciate you taking their Dino Tamer brand, for example.
Play around that.
That's kind of an unlikely effect, but any sort of combo is not going to appreciate you taking their combo.
I'll tell you, I actually quite like this for the fact that the priest does have to be somewhat careful when they play this, because it has the potential to really screw them over. As in the right matchup, you play out their Spawn of Shadows if you're playing against Raza Priest, or in Standard, you play out some of their other AoE so they don't have any left. It's like you have the real potential to then screw over the priest. So I don't think it's quite like an unfair card. I say this before it comes into the meta, and then like a month from now, I might think, Jesus Christ, I hate this thing. I really hate this thing. On the surface, I keep thinking, well, the priest has to make sure that they haven't got all their combo pieces in hand, or that I can't disrupt them in some game-losing way. Do you know?
I mean, it's not just a card you can play out with no thought. That's absolutely true. It's not you just play it and, it's an auto win and, it's insane broken. Like, you do have to actually think about what you when you're playing it. But I don't think that changes how broken it is. I don't think we've really had a card that patches up a class's weakness quite to the extent that this does.
Nope. Nope.
Like Arcane Flak Mage and Secret Mage is like a possible exception, but this is more effective at countering than Arcane Flak Mages and Secret Mage. So
it's like you said in the last episode about Grommash, it's tech that you just play in the deck anyway.
Yeah, exactly. There's no downside to running this, really.
Yeah.
It's always going to have some sort of use at some point in the game. That's the thing that strikes me about it. There's always going to be a point in the game where this is good, whether it's to stall in the early game, whether it's to do some late game rubbish. Kind of like Fireheart in that it's going to always have a use to it.
I get the feeling from looking at this card that it's going to be more effective in Wild than it is in Standard. But what do you think?
I agree completely, because there's more combo decks in Wild.
Yeah.
What I will say is that the combo decks in Standard are much less resilient to the ones in Wild, which means that if they do become good, Priest's going to absolutely ruin them with this.
Yeah, that's the thing. Something that I've sort of spoken about to you in the past, and I've sort of spoken about to quite a few other people, is that I kind of like how a lot of combo decks in Wild are becoming more, well, like you say, resilient to disruption. If you're playing Malygos Druid, there have been times where I've had, for example, Kun ratted out of my hand, or Aviana, and I've still gone on to win the game because Geppetto Joybuzz is your win condition in that case, and he draws your combo pieces to enable some sort of crazy lethal. Or even just playing Malygos into Double Moonfire or something like that. Like, combo decks are becoming so resilient that sometimes Dirty Rat isn't enough. Like, I think the best example of that was when Star Aligner Druid was running the meta. You needed 2 Dirty Rats because there were so many combo pieces to that deck that weren't completely essential. 1 rat often wasn't enough.
You often would have a ton of minions in hand. Like, you would have, like, Bran and Lothar, like Brewmaster if you're running Brewmaster, and all of this stuff, and it was really sort of high roller, right?
It's like you say, we've never had a card like this. I really like how it just rewards foresight and thinking and planning and knowing the meta and maybe your opponent's deck. I think it's really interesting, and I am going to absolutely hate playing against it. This is like Show James talking. We've seen all the cards now. What do you actually think of Scholomance Academy? Like, what's your first impression?
I think it's ramped the power level up a bit. Mid-year expansions are generally sort of medium power level, right? They're not often sort of super broken. It seems like a lot of the last of the 3 ones are super broken. And I'm not saying Scholomance is particularly broken in terms of power level, but I think there's a lot of really strong cards and stuff that's gone under the radar as well, I'm sure. Like Rune Dagger, for example. That's a really good card.
Is that the Shaman weapon?
Yeah, 2 mana 1/3 after your hero attacks, gain spell damage +1 this turn. Now, that strikes me as being a really strong card. It's like an on-demand spell damage activator.
Yeah, that's fair.
And like Soul Fragment seems like a pretty overpowered archetype in terms of you're playing no downside cards that are pretty well started already, and they're shuffling good cards into your deck that you want to draw. And then you can destroy those good cards and get insane effects off of them. I
also feel like the set's power level is quite high. I think that Descent of Dragons, Ashes of Outlands, and this have all had really high power levels, like rivaling Not exceeding, but rivaling something like Kobolds and Catacombs or Knights of the Frozen Throne, like historically really powerful expansions.
I don't think they stand up to Kobolds.
No.
But I don't think anything stands up to Kobolds. I don't think anything ever will, hopefully.
But you see what I mean in that I think a lot of the cards here are either going to be staples right out of the gate, or they're just waiting for the right cards to come along. I think a lot of them are going to take some testing, but I have a strong feeling that they're going to be quite powerful. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe out there, but that's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Leave a review. Thank you.